All right, so the first comment that we've got is from Ace of Fade Nails. It just never stops. I would love a little pause button for feelings in my ear or something. Yeah, I completely understand. I didn't realize that the voice inside my head was so constant and so loud, and that it wasn't common for everyone to kind of have that really intense inner monologue. And I remember a lot of times when I was really heavily struggling with intrusive thoughts, I would be talking to someone or someone would be talking to me, and it almost felt like I had a radio on in my head that was just as loud as the person talking to me. And I would have to focus specifically and kind of tell myself like, shh. I would have to focus on quieting that inner voice so that I could even focus or have a chance of hearing what the other person was saying. And it can be really exhausting and draining when that voice is so consistent. It's very powerful, and the more you entertain it, I think, the more power you give it. But if you don't know what's going on or kind of where these thoughts are coming from or what they even are, it can be hard to turn them down, to kind of tune them out and to not give them power. So I think a lot of times when people are struggling with this, if they don't know what it is yet or that they're struggling with anything, they're kind of inadvertently giving these thoughts power. And so they kind of come back harder and stronger and more frequent. And it can definitely feel like overwhelming at times when you just kind of want to shut it all off and just take a minute of quiet where it's just you actually left alone with the thoughts that you're voluntarily choosing to think. Because the thing about intrusive thoughts is that they're so not welcome. They're not things that you would ever voluntarily choose to think about. They are these kind of terrible projections of really negative scenarios and emotions and feelings. And it's torture. It's really like torture, and you can feel at time like you're just torturing yourself. And I know that I did this for a long time, and I'm really thankful to kind of be on the other side of that now because it was exhausting. The next comment that we've got is from Will. My mom always used to say I would never amount to anything growing up, and it's constantly that going around my head 24/7. Yeah, I don't know if this is specific to narcissistic parents particularly, but I have got quite a bank of things that my parents have said to me that I don't think I will ever forget. And I've been able to kind of just leave them aside. It's like, you put them in a box and then you put them up in the attic in the back and they get dusty. And it's like, they're still there. You'll probably never get rid of them. You're not going to like sell them at the yard sale, but you're also not going to see them every day. And I feel like anytime I'm tempted to just kind of like open that box, it's like, no. And that can be a really difficult thing to do, especially if you're still living with your parents or if you see them frequently. It can be a lot easier to be reminded of those things. For me, I've been on and off no contact with my parents for the last 4.5 years or so. At this point, I haven't really spoken to them for the last probably 2 or 3 months. And so when you kind of branch off and you start living your own life, it can be a little bit easier to tune those things out, especially if you have other people in your life who tell you things about yourself that are the opposite, that are really positive. And if you can kind of believe those things about yourself also, whether it's through work or something that you're passionate about, a hobby, it's so important, especially as an adult child of narcissistic parents who for so long you kind of grew up wanting the validation and affection from your parents and tailoring the things that you said and did, your behavior, to what was most favorable to them. It can be really difficult to kind of know who you are and what you like and what your best qualities are. And that's kind of a whole journey of self-discovery that I think a lot of adult children of narcissists have to kind of undergo at one point or another. And that can be a really scary thing, but it's also really wonderful. And so I think it's important to kind of cut yourself some slack and to realize maybe why your parents were saying those things. What other characteristics do they have that are negative? Are they grounded in anything? Were they just saying that negative about you to make themselves feel better? And it can be difficult because they are your parents, but I think it's important to kind of not take those things to heart and to put them in a box up in the attic and let them collect dust where they belong. All right, this next comment that we've got is from Rainy Day. Without the highs and lows of abuse on our nervous system, we trigger the highs and lows with the intrusive thoughts. Breaking the cycle is difficult. I can only stop while life runs along smoothly. One hiccup and I'm running crazy scenarios. Yeah, I've definitely sort of scratched the surface in my research with the impacts of narcissistic parents and childhood trauma on your nervous system. One of the things that I've read, this is a little unrelated, but one of the things that I've read has been about fatigue and how for so long your nervous system is kind of in this state where you're on edge and you don't feel at ease, that when you're finally out of that, you can feel completely exhausted. And it's almost weird. This is something that I've experienced where after being on edge for so long and kind of walking on eggshells and always wondering how what you say or do is going to affect the other people around you, when you're in a calm, peaceful environment, it can almost feel wrong or like it's hard to believe that everything is just going so smoothly. You're kind of just waiting for the next thing to just erupt because you're not used to such long periods of time of just peace and quiet and understanding and calm energy. And you kind of grow to expect these things. So when you're in a healthy environment, it can feel uncomfortable or abnormal, not familiar. I definitely think that throughout the healing journey, there are going to be times, kind of especially earlier on when you're just starting out, it can be really overwhelming, all of the things that you're kind of uncovering and you're learning to deal with and cope with, all of these things that you're realizing have kind of impacted you and stuck with you into your adulthood. And so it can be really difficult, even when you know what these things are and you want to take these steps in the right direction consciously. If something comes up that sort of triggers you, something that you've had a hard time with, it can make it a lot harder to kind of take these steps in the right direction because you're feeling so overwhelmed already that you just don't have the emotional strength. You don't have the mental capacity to handle that in the moment. And so it kind of triggers these behaviors and you fall back into that same pattern of negative behavior. And it happens. It's part of the process. It's important to forgive yourself, but it's really important to realize what's going on and next time to try to even do better. And the more you do that, the more consistently you kind of recognize what's going on and make the right steps, the easier that will get over time, I think. The next comment is from Ari. Yes, I have severe intrusive thoughts and OCD after I had my daughter. It's rooted in anxiety, and I found a lot of success in using grounding techniques like I would if I was dealing with a panic attack or anxiety attack to deal with them. Wow. Yeah, I've read a bit about grounding techniques and things that you can do to just kind of remind yourself of your environment and to be a little bit more present. And I think when you get so overwhelmed mentally, introducing a physical element to that can be really beneficial. I am not diagnosed, but I definitely exhibit some OCD type tendencies. I think I have for a really long time. I think that stems from some kind of control, or I think the thing that I've thought the most is for so long when I was in such an uncontrollable environment, just kind of a volatile environment where you never knew what was going to happen. It was kind of up to someone else to determine whether or not it was going to be a good day. You can only control the things that are small, that are within your control, maybe like how clean your room is. And I think that that can kind of manifest itself in some strange ways for sure. But I definitely think that that's a great idea, trying some grounding techniques. And intrusive thoughts can trigger, I think, panic attacks and anxiety attacks. I feel like for me, they definitely have. I don't know specifically the characteristics of a panic attack or an anxiety attack, if there are certain things that you kind of have to experience for that to fall into that category. But for me, I definitely know that I've had times when I was hyperventilating, when I was crying, when I was, my heart was beating really fast, I was hot. And those at times were just triggered purely by thoughts, things that would kind of come into my brain. All right, next we have got user and a bunch of numbers. Yep, I couldn't work most of my adult life due to PTSD. I was constantly terrified that I would do something wrong and get fired. I know this is because of how I grew up. I was always told I did things wrong or couldn't do things that others could. When I was doing a bit of research on intrusive thoughts, CPTSD kept coming up also. And so I looked into that briefly, and it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And this happens more often than not when you've been exposed to some sort of chronic trauma. It's long-term trauma. And again, I'm no expert here. These are all just things that I've kind of been learning and trying to apply to my own situation if I feel like they fit, or if I feel like they help me to explain something about my own life. And I think one of the things that can be difficult about children of narcissistic parents is you're really not considered an adult until you're 18 years old. And so if you have narcissistic parents who have always kind of been exhibiting the same kind of behavior, that can be reinforced in your life for 18 years, maybe more. And so that is extremely long term, in my opinion, and your relationship with your parents is often so involved. You're living under the same roof, you're eating at the same table. And so not only is it a long period of time, but it's very involved and it's very present and constant because of how close your relationship just naturally is with your parents more often than not. Things that your parents say can definitely stick with you for a long time, but it's important to not let that define you, and to kind of understand maybe why your parents were saying those things about anyone but themselves. It most likely doesn't have anything to do with you specifically, and that's kind of for you to decide, for you to kind of put yourself out into the world, to see what your strengths are, to see what your weaknesses are, to see what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you feel comfortable doing and what you don't. And it can be really easy when you grow up for so long saying and doing things that you think are going to be favorable to other people to not really have an idea of who you are or what you want. And that's something that's really important to kind of unpack and I guess start to learn moving forward on this journey. One of the things that I can relate to most with that last comment, when I was growing up, my parents were very much of the belief, if we can't all do it together, we're not going to do it at all. And so if you ever wanted to kind of go off and do something with a friend or on your own that either a parent or a sibling also wanted to be a part of but couldn't, it either wasn't allowed, or if you did manage to make it happen somehow, you were made to feel incredibly guilty for it. And so this was difficult for me after moving out of my parents' house, doing things that I knew I could hear them in my head and what they would say. I can't believe you're doing this without me, or I can't believe you did this even though I can't have it too. And it was hard for me for a time to kind of let that guilt go and to realize that them saying those things was unhealthy. That was not fair. It was abnormal. And so me moving forward in life as an adult, independent, as an individual, doing all of these things on my own was not wrong. Investing in myself was not wrong. Doing things that they talked about wanting to do but never did was not wrong. And so you kind of recognize a lot of these things at different times as you're kind of presented with these different situations. And I think that's why so many people refer to it as a journey, as a healing journey, because I don't necessarily think there is one end goal, especially when there's so much to unpack and so much to face. You're always learning new things. You're always realizing how things have shaped you and how you want to feel moving forward. It's kind of this constant unpacking, redefining growth. And again, it can be confusing and overwhelming, but it's also incredibly wonderful and freeing. And that's why it's worth it. So thank you for all of those comments, for everybody who's been commenting and interacting with my TikToks and my videos. I will be back in just a few days, I'm sure, with another episode diving into some more comments. So thank you so much for sticking around, and I will see you next time. Let's keep it moving,